Hello and welcome to episode 192 of Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty. Of course, I am your host, Rick Doherty. Maz is back on the show today, and we're going to be talking about a topic that has really been on my mind since the D23 Expo announcements back in August. Paid skip-the-line passes are having a negative impact on Walt Disney World beyond just the extra cost, and we are going to talk about it today. Of course, make sure that you're subscribed to the Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty YouTube channel. Also, like this podcast and drop some comments. It really means a lot to us. Right now, let's bring Maz back on the show. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So if you follow the YouTube channel and you watch my videos, you will see that a few weeks ago, Maz and I were at Epcot together. And unfortunately, a lot of that conversation turned to some negatives and some of the changes that have been going on at Walt Disney World. And we definitely are at the point where we need to address some of these. And for those of you who like a good rant podcast episode, you're going to get it today. For those of you who like that we try to keep things positive most of the time, I do think that we will find some ways to throw in some positivity. And I think the main thing that we want to address with this is there are ways that Disney can make this better. So if we are negative, we are coming at it through a sense of this is how they can fix some of the things that are happening. Where I want to start with this is a few years ago, Disney instituted paid Fastpass. Lightning Lane, Genie Plus, we know all the different naming mechanisms that have gone along with that. And I don't think anybody was thrilled with the fact that they went to paid Fastpass. It wasn't a surprise. What I don't like are the unforeseen consequences of paid Fastpass and how that is impacting the parks. The first one we are going to talk about is the most obvious, and that's the disability access system. As somebody who used to qualify for the DAS system and does not anymore, I want you to talk about this specifically because I don't think people quite understand how much of an impact this is having on people, the changes that were made specifically to DAS.
I don't personally think that the DAS changes came about because Disney wanted to make more money on paid Fastpass, but I believe they're linked because they came about when people started paying for Lightning Lanes and then were complaining that the wait was still 15 to 20 minutes. And Disney stepped back and said, hey, we have to clear this line out to make it a lot faster. What can we do? And then someone came to them and said, hey, you're doing more than you legally have to for this disability program. You can scale it way back and within your legal, reasonable right to do so. And Disney said, hey, great, let's do it. We don't have to go above and beyond, so we're not going to anymore. And so it became kind of an unfortunate side consequence of the paid Fastpass program.
And just to sort of build off of what you were saying, when the Fastpass system was free, when everybody got 3 Fastpasses and then they could make more in the day, there are a lot of people who might only ride 3 or 4 rides in a day when they're visiting the Disney parks. So when Fastpass was free, there were fewer people who had to look for disability access because they were already skipping the line for 3, 4, 5 rides a day. So that was a huge benefit for those people. At that time, we didn't know how many people needed another option to avoid waiting in the longer lines.
Right. And I think another key thing is the previous Fastpass Plus program allowed people to re-ride things. So if you got a fast pass for Space Mountain as one of your three pre-selects and one became available again later in the day, and that's your party's favorite ride, and maybe for some people it's the only ride you're interested in doing that day, they were able to do it again. And that's something that when they moved to the paid programs, they eliminated, but DAS was still able to cover. So for people with, families who maybe have children who are neurodivergent in some way and prefer riding the same thing, for people who have parties with disabilities who are limited in what they can ride and therefore only have a few selections of what they can ride, or for people who simply find great joy in riding the same things, there were options to do that. And now when it became paid, the only option, the only way to be able to do that was through DAS. So I think that also contributed to the uptick that they saw.
I think that is such an important point you are making, because it is not only that it is now a paid program, it's that the program doesn't necessarily even accommodate. So it's not like somebody, for example, you can't just pay for the paid Fast Pass program and enjoy the parks the same way that you did when you had the Disability Access Pass, or the ways that you did when you had Fast Pass Plus.
Yes. And I think the other big aspect of that is when you had FastPass Plus and you were locked into a 1 hour return window and something happened and you couldn't make that window, it didn't feel like the end of the world because it was a free program. So you either go, okay, I lost that one. Maybe I'll see if I can make another one down the road. Whatever, not the end of the world. Or with DAS, you can return any time after your return time. So if something interrupts you and you're not able to return right on the dot at 60 minutes, say if the line is that long, you can go later in the day. With the new MultiPass, Genie Plus, the paid systems, you're paying up front a certain amount of money. So if you pay $21 a day and you have your 3 pre-booked rides and something happens and now you feel like you can't make it to one of your rides within the return window, there's no guarantee that Disney will accommodate a late return. So now the stakes are so much higher that you've just shelled out, if you're a party of 4 or 5, so much money for this. And then to say, oh, well, we can't make it, or, oh, I don't feel like I can ride this at this time. There's a lot more riding on that. You're spending a lot more money on that. That money could be a meal. And so I think that also made people long for the more flexible option that DAS offered.
Because my wife, Courtney, is also somebody who qualified under the old DAS system and no longer qualifies for it. And there were times the return time was a big deal. The fact that, let's say we were at Epcot and she wanted to do Frozen, and we could make a Frozen DAS. It was a 60-minute wait, so we could sit in the Odyssey building in the air conditioning. She could relax. Usually there's something that she could get to eat there, and we could wait the hour sitting there at the Odyssey building. And then when it came time for that DAS reservation, if she still was feeling like she needed another half hour to sit, we could just keep sitting, and she didn't have to worry about getting up, making sure we walked all the way over. If it started raining, if it was still too hot, if she was just like, I want to wait until 7 o'clock tonight when the sun's starting to go down a little bit and it's a little cooler, and I don't have to ride anything in between now and then. So, it's not going to impact me making another DAS. And it gave people flexibility who are so used to their lives being so rigid and inflexible. And that's one of the saddest things about the DAS disappearing or changing.
Yes, about DAS changing. And that's something that, I really relate to for myself. My whole life these days is very rigid and it's very built around, routine and schedule. And I know that I can do X at Y time, but not at, slightly over that time, because that's going to screw me up for the next meeting I have or whatever I have later in the day. And it is so rigid every time I go anywhere. It's, everything is planned so precisely, often to the point of, having to tell my travel companions, I know you really want to do this thing, but I just can't. And them having to miss out on something. And so it was really nice going to Disney and being able to have a little flexibility to where if I say, you know what, I'm not feeling well, I can't do this, I can come back 4 hours later and say, okay, now I can. And I don't lose anything. I can send my friends on other rides and they can go have fun, but then we can all meet up and do one thing together at least. And, there's something about losing that ability not to feel as much like a burden as I normally do when I'm traveling with others. That's personally for me a disappointment.
And I just did the math in my head, and this is actually kind of blowing my mind a little bit. But I have been meeting up with you for some form or fashion in the parks for 5 years now. And it's not, it's maybe once or twice a year. But this last time, because you no longer qualify for DAS under this new system, was the first time that our conversations in the parks really revolved around your disability, because you didn't have to think of it as much in previous times. But this time, because your trip changed so much and because it impacted you so much, half of our conversations, having not seen each other in over a year, now granted we do a podcast together, but were about this. And I just remember, like, when I was leaving the park that day, and I was like, man, this is the closest I'll get to a swear word on this. Man, that sucks. Like, you look forward to seeing your friends at the theme parks when they come once or twice per year, and then half of the conversation was spent talking about how your disability impacts your vacation, when we never had to have that conversation before. We maybe did a little bit, but it was such a dominating factor, and I kind of felt bad about it, actually.
Don't feel bad about it, but it's true. I mean, that's kind of how it is on like regular non-Disney vacations, where it's always a forefront of being like, hey guys, keep in mind, can't do this because of this. And, again, Disney is well within their legal right to do this. I'm not out here saying, Disney's breaking laws or that I'm entitled to something, but it was very nice to have a place to vacation where you felt taken care of and where you could kind of let down your guard a bit and just enjoy the trip instead of having to constantly every second be so militant about where you are, what you're doing, what's coming next.
That perfectly segues into where I wanted to go next with this, because Disney had the reputation for being accommodating. They latched on to gay days pretty early. Like, yes, that was a fan-started event, but they embraced it at a time when it was still pretty unpopular to embrace that. And there are clips of Michael Eisner, the old chairman and CEO, saying, if you have a problem with that, don't come to the parks. Like, could you imagine Bob Iger saying something like that? But anyway, I'm going to move past that for a second. What bothers me the most is that this was part of the Disney brand. Disney is changing their brand to do paid Fastpass. Another aspect of their brand and inclusivity that goes beyond people with disabilities are rides like the People Mover and rides like Living with the Land and It's a Small World. It's a Small World is so nostalgic. I don't know, maybe that could be made today, but Living with the Land and the People Mover would never be made today because even though Living with the Land is part of the Fastpass system, you don't need one. I don't think people really ever get a lightning lane for Living with the Land, and you don't need one for People Mover. Rides that aren't major e-ticket attractions, we're starting to see them disappear. Experiences where you can just be like, oh, I'm just going to do that. I'm going to hop on the Mark Twain or the Liberty Bell, depending on if you're at Disneyland or Walt Disney World. And it just pulled right up to the dock here. I can just get on for a half hour. I can go around the rivers of America. And now they're getting rid of the rivers of America in Walt Disney World, and they're going to get rid of the Liberty Bell, and you're not going to be able to ride that and just hop on something because they can't charge a lightning lane for it.
Yeah, I think that the parks are in a very different world right now. I think after 2020, they really had a shift in their mindset where they had to shut down the parks, and then when they came back, it was very much, you know, how do we try to recoup from our losses? And that mentality focused on the bottom line hasn't really gone away. That idea that, they can still be making great things. And I think the new things coming to the parks are awesome ideas. I'm very excited for them. We talked about that. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're fully being done for the right reasons, if that makes sense. I think there's definitely a lot of motivation there to say, these are popular things. People are going to love it. We're going to be able to build these e-ticket attractions that people will buy lightning lanes to. We can sell individual lightning lanes for some of these rides. It's going to be great. And I think there's a lot more focus on that aspect instead of like, hey, how can we expand our park to be more exciting or atmospheric or friendly towards future generations?
So just a quick heads up, there is some construction happening around Maz's house, and we're gonna play through it, right? It's like a little drizzle at a baseball game. We're just gonna play through, hope it doesn't get too bad. The areas where I think this is a big deal, like I know when I was a kid and my entire family came down for a Walt Disney World vacation. And when I say my entire family, I mean my grandparents, my aunts and uncles. There were people from infants to people in their probably 60s or 70s at that point. And everybody had things that they could do during the day. You could take the infant or the grandmother on the People Mover. You could do It's a Small World. Inclusion isn't always about, marginalized communities. Sometimes inclusion is just about people who don't want to do thrill rides. Disney always had great thrill rides that weren't too thrilling, like Big Thunder Mountain Railroad, or even, I would say, this still works with Guardians of the Galaxy Cosmic Rewind, although I do know a lot of people do have some issues with it as far as getting motion sickness and things like that. But I think a point where it's a small thing, but it signified a change in philosophy when they opened Tron Light Cycle Run and you couldn't take on a bag, and they needed to implement for the very first time at a Disney theme park, or at least a US Disney theme park, they had to implement a locker system. And I know it's not a big deal. They have locker systems over at Universal, but Disney was always the place where you could buy something in the store and it didn't matter if it was in a big bag, because you could take that bag on Big Thunder Mountain Railroad, or you could take that bag on Space Mountain. And for the first time, they weren't necessarily thinking about how the most people could ride this. They created Tron Light Cycle Run, and there are some people who just can't fit on it. And they do have accessible cars that do run on the ride, so maybe somebody who is a little bigger can still do it. But it's just another step away from the way that they used to do it that was making it easy for everybody.
It's also not necessarily even just rides that are part of the inclusivity, it's the atmosphere. And I'm going to pick on a park here, and I'm sorry in advance, but Hollywood Studios is a park that has a lot of e-ticket attractions. It has a lot of hugely popular, big thrill themed rides and very little atmosphere. And it is one of those parks that parents are constantly like, what am I going to do with my 3-year-old all day in Hollywood Studios? Because there's just not enough to fill the day. Or people who don't want to go on big thrill rides. There's just not enough atmosphere in the park for them to enjoy. And I think that's part of the inclusivity, is having those more quiet, non-ride things inside parks for people to just absorb. And I think it's like the Streetmosphere characters. They were a huge part of the parks, and like they're gone now. So when you go to Hollywood Studios and you're walking around, it's like, personally for me, my least favorite park to just exist in, because there's nothing to like really enjoy when you're just hanging out in the park. And I think bringing back the little things like that go a really long way into making the parks an inclusive environment for all ages.
And Hollywood Studios is the perfect example of a park that was kind of ruined by Lightning Lane, because you absolutely need Lightning Lane. You got to get to Rise of the Resistance. You have to do Slinky Dog Dash. You have to do Tower of Terror. All of these rides have incredibly long lines, so they want you to buy Lightning Lane. But then let's say you get a Lightning Lane and you happen to luck into getting one for every ride at Hollywood Studios. Well, what are you going to do in between? Because yes, you can go see the Beauty and the Beast show that has been running since Beauty and the Beast was a new movie. You can go do Muppet Vision 3D, which we all love it. Yes, it's amazing, but it takes a couple minutes out of your day and then you're done. The Indiana Jones Stunt Spectacular is great, but it also opened right around the same time as the park. So if you go more than once, you've definitely seen it before. And Beauty and the Beast and Indiana Jones shut down at like 5 o'clock in the afternoon. So if you're there at night, there's literally only rides and a couple little other things, but it doesn't have that walk around ability like Epcot or Disney's Animal Kingdom. We're lucky we got Animal Kingdom when we did, because if we got it 5 years later, half of the great things about it wouldn't exist.
Oh, it would be a completely different park, which is wild, no pun intended, to think about.
And this is when I'm going to lead into what is happening in Frontierland at Magic Kingdom, because I think this is where Lightning Lane has really reared its ugly head the worst. Paid Fastpass here is going to destroy my favorite part of Magic Kingdom. And nope, I didn't do Tom Sawyer Island all that often. I didn't ride the Liberty Bell all that often. But I liked having the Rivers of America there. It made for some beautiful pictures. Standing right on that bridge at the Rivers of America and looking at Cinderella Castle was like the second best place to watch Happily Ever After, besides right on Main Street, USA. You could just hear the soundtrack. You could watch the fireworks from a different angle. It was amazing. It's such a beautiful shot. And now it's going to be more concrete and a Cars Land. And I'm happy that they're bringing in a Cars Land, but it is going to take so much atmosphere away, And I think there was especially an older group of people that the atmosphere was what separated a place like Magic Kingdom from a place like a Six Flags. And I'm not putting down Six Flags, but that is what made the price difference worth it. That you would get these beautiful shots. There were places to sit and just relax and people watch. When was the last time you saw a bench available at a Disney park?
When you said sit and people watch, it made me think that benches are disappearing at like a rapid rate. And even tables at Epcot, walking around for food and wine, there were so many fewer tables, but there were also across all the parks so many fewer benches. And the benches that were there were occupied 100% of the time because there's like one bench for every 50,000 people.
There's an old video that I see every once in a while where Michael Eisner is speaking in front of Cinderella Castle to people in Magic Kingdom. They're having some sort of event. I don't remember what. But at some point during that video, they're behind him looking out at the crowd, and you see all of these trees in the hub with the partner statue. And there's just trees everywhere. The next time you're in Magic Kingdom, walk to the hub and count how many trees are there, because it had an atmosphere at the time. And the more that they do this conveyor belt mentality and this, now we're on ride A and now we move to ride B and now we move to ride C, the more they do that, the more they take away what made Disney special in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, it's become that conveyor belt of, we have to do this, then we have to do this, then we have to do this. And you're just going from ride to ride to ride with few opportunities to just sit and enjoy it. And those quiet, peaceful moments are usually some of my favorites when I'm reflecting back on trips. And I think about the times that I was able to just sit and, take in the beautiful surroundings, or listen to the family next to me talk about how great their day has been, or just enjoy, how beautiful it is outside. And the fact that, we're kind of losing that is very disappointing to me. And I really do hope that when building Cars Land, they keep that in mind. And I really hope we get something. We're losing the river, but maybe we can get a waterfall? I don't know. I hope we get something nice to look at that's maybe not going to keep us boxed in by crowds on every single side.
And I don't know, but we might have done this to ourselves a little bit as a fan community. And this might be my last sort of controversial statement of the episode. But we did make it so much of we have to be there at rope drop. So if we're going to get there at rope drop, we have to leave the resort at this time. And then we have to go through security and we have to be ready so that when they start walking us into Frontierland, we can be the first people to get in the Big Thunder Mountain Railroad queue, and then we'll make our way over to Splash, and then we'll make our way over to Pirates of the Caribbean, and by the time people really start coming, we'll have gotten through the whole left side of the park, and then we'll head over to Fantasyland. And because we bought into the conveyor belt mentality, then they were all of a sudden able to say, well, hey, if getting a lot of rides done is what you want, we can make that happen. They'll charge you a little more for it. And now the people who have to get every moment out of their vacation, and like you said, as much as when I was planning vacations, like when I lived in Arizona and we came here and I was planning this ride, then this ride, then this ride, that vacation, my favorite moments are all sitting around, doing things, having conversations on benches, seeing little kids interact with the characters, just all the atmosphere that's going on around was always my favorite part.
I think part of it, like you said, we do it to ourselves, but part of it is, Disney's expensive. And it's for, families to come, for parents to come, take their children. If you've got a family of 4 or 5 coming to Disney World, that's a really expensive vacation. And so, of course, you're going to sit down and try to strategize to the nth degree to say, okay, if we're, paying this much for park tickets and paying this much for hotel, and then we have to pay this much for the multi-pass, how can we maximize every second of our day to make it really worth our money? And I absolutely understand that mentality. Like I don't think there's anything wrong with that mentality. I just think that that's a reality of the world we're in where it's kind of lose-lose. Like people can't really afford to say, "Oh, I'm going to sit around and plan, 25 minutes of sitting on a park bench in Magic Kingdom with my, 2 toddlers anymore." And so they miss out on it. They don't realize what they're missing out on. And then the parks see it and go, hey, people aren't doing this. We don't need to do it. And so then they eliminate it. And, I think it's just kind of an unfortunate cycle that we're trapped in. But like, it is what it is at sometimes.
When I was a kid, it was the book that you could get at the bookstore and you could read about all the different tricks to making the most out of your Disney vacation. And then it moved on to the internet. It moved on to now TikTok videos. And everyone is telling you how much you can do in a day and the ways that you can stretch your day to the point that if you do ride 5 rides on a vacation day, you feel like you didn't get your money's worth, even if you had a good time. And then that leads right into Disney saying, we can occupy every minute of your day. And I tell you what, we're even going to make it a little easier for $20 extra. And then you pay the $20 extra and you still rope drop and you still do all the other things. And that's where I do think we kind of did it to ourselves a little bit by trying to have this list of how much we did instead of just thinking this is how much fun I had there.
Oh man, I'm gonna get real unlike how I like to be right now, but I think that social media has unfortunately presented an aspect of keeping up with the Joneses. That people have felt the need to replicate. And so you see it in Disney groups when people are saying, oh, well, I saw on TikTok that someone did X, Y, and Z and they were able to get 10 rides done in a day. And so I need to do that, but I need to do 11. And then you also see it come across in different Disney groups where I'm seeing now this mentality of expecting to be pixie dusted. Which pixie dusting is like when cast members would just make a magic moment for you out of the goodness of their own hearts. So like when I went to Disney after I graduated college, one of the cast members gave me a free dessert one time because they were like, congratulations, here's a free dessert. That was pixie dust. And it was wonderful. But now we're seeing people go up to cast members and say, hey, my daughter's turning 6 today. How can you pixie dust her? And it's like, well, oh, hold on. That's not how it works. Or you see someone saying, well, I saw Joe on TikTok got pixie dusted and upgraded to Polynesian from All Star Music. Do that for me too. And, we're seeing this demand to try to like keep up and keep one bettering each other. And it's also contributing to us losing those little organic things that helped make Disney so magical. Because now cast members just aren't feeling like they can pixie dust anymore, because the second they do it to one person, the person in line behind them is going to go, well, you just gave that kid a free Mickey bar. Why isn't my kid getting a free Mickey bar? So, sorry, I'll get off my rant about people, but it is frustrating to see that.
And I know when I was going on vacations and I would hear people who are locals kind of saying these things, I would be like, yeah, but you don't understand when you only have a certain amount of time. But then when I was on vacation in 2018 and I was here for a week, it got to the point where I was like, well, I guess to feel like I'm doing something, I have to go ride magic carpets of Aladdin. Like, you do end up doing everything that you want if you just have a good plan and you don't necessarily have to bust it from sun up to sundown every single day.
And sometimes, you'll end up having more fun breaking from the plan than you had ever expected or could ever have on the plan, which I think is another detriment of the planned and advanced paid fast pass, because then you really do feel stuck to a schedule. But one of the most fun mornings I had in Disney World was one time my friend and I were rope dropping. Our plan was to book it to Seven Dwarfs, to ride Seven Dwarfs early in the day before the line got super long. The rope drop crowd was crazy. The line going there, we were just not feeling like fighting the crowds. So for whatever reason, we turned tail and we booked it over to Dumbo. And as two adults, we rode Dumbo to start the day. Hadn't been on it in probably 10 years. And it was so much fun. And that led to us laughing and joking around and going, you know what, this trip, we're going to do every spinner ride in Disney World. And we did, and it was funny, and we got great pictures on every single ride. And it's a great memory that we now get to look back at and go, oh my gosh, do you remember when we did that spur of the moment thing? Where if we had had that paid 8 a.m. Seven Dwarfs Fast Pass, we would have had to do that regardless.
Listen, I mean, I think you know where I'm going to go with this. Like, one of my favorite moments ever was when we sat in the pouring rain waiting for Harmonious at Epcot. There's a lot of fun to be had in the parks, and you don't necessarily need to have Lightning Lane to do it. And the more we rely on things like paid Fast Pass, the more we're going to lose the things that we didn't realize were our favorite parts of the park.
Definitely. One more gripe about MultiPass and its current form that I think is important to bring up, especially if you're someone who enjoys character meets. Currently, there are no character meets on MultiPass. So if you are a family or you are a person who enjoys going to meet characters, make sure to factor that into your planning, because you can't get a Lightning Lane to go meet Mickey and Minnie or anyone like that. And that also is something that affects DAS users or previous DAS users who no longer qualify. Because now if you say, okay, well, you can't qualify for DAS, just get MultiPass and make the best of it, well, there's still no way to meet the characters because you can't MultiPass those lines. And sometimes those lines get pretty long. So I'd like to see that changed, personally.
What a great note. Great way to end the episode. Maz, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
You made it to the end of the episode, so there is no excuse not to make sure you like and maybe drop a positive comment. We are almost at our 200th episode, and I just can't believe how successful we have been with this show. This has been episode 192 of Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty. Sarah Says will be joining me again next week when we take a look at the career of the pioneering woman of Disney, Mary Blair. That will be next Thursday. Until then, have a great week.